forward. So this is an opportunity for Ignacio and I to share our most recent and only our first publication. Thanks to the Community Economies Institute and the support from Anne Hill, from Jenny Cameron, from Isaac, Lynn, and I think there was who else? I forgot who else. But we were encouraged to submit our paper, and it took about maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years to finally get it accepted by a publisher. So we are very excited and feel grateful for this opportunity to articulate our work, which has been, on the ground with communities the last 10, 11 years. And so we got the opportunity to express this within an academic setting. So great. So this is what this is about. I guess we're going to try to sum it up, I guess, in a few slides of what we submitted.
Alison,
Yes.
Sorry, but I can hear you. I'm not sure, Jenny, how I can hear you, but your audio is somewhat unstable. Like when you move,
Oh,
at least in my end, like it goes up and down. I
okay.
I can still hear you, but I don't know if you know how
Oh,
maybe
for
move
me,
less.
for me, you're pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, same here.
Okay. Well then,
Yep.
that's good.
Okay, but I'll be aware if I need to talk slower or anything. Okay, so where are we? Where have we done this grassroots learning? And so just before we delve into the text or in the info, I just wanted to give you a context. We are located in Chile, which, as you know, is in South America. And Chile is a long country and it's very diverse in ecosystems. So we are actually in the bottom part of Chile. We're in the southern part where we border with Argentina. So you can see it's a long, thin country, and we're at the bottom part. And then if you keep zooming in, there's a little lake there by the coast, right south of Saavedra, and that is where this work has been taking place. It's on the coast. It's a wetland. This was created in the 70s by a tsunami, actually, because it was one big system of water flows. And in the 60s or 70s, there was a tsunami, and it maintained its structure as what is considered a lake, but actually was rivers back in the day. And this is a photo view of it through the by a plane that our friends took. We were excited because since we've been so close to this territory and we've never seen it in an actual bird's eye view for real, it feels to us like this huge living entity with all of our partners in there, where we know where they live. I mean, it was really special to see this photo. So Lake Budi is a biocultural hotspot. We like to say it's in Northern Patagonia because it gives it an importance from the perspective of conservation, even though a lot of people say, oh, it's not really in Patagonia, but we say it's Northern Patagonia. It's a coastal wetland habitat for hundreds of endemic and migratory species. And of course, the ancestral homeland for the Mapuche-Lafkenche peoples, today around 15,000 peoples that surround this waterway system, this flow or lake, about maybe 115 different Mapuche communities. And through grassroots learning, we are determining practical steps towards restoring this territory and its self-governance for good life, or in the Mapuche word, kvmemongen. Oh, I guess I have to say Ignacio.
No, yeah. I'm just saying that this is just reiterating, I think. I don't want to reiterate, but just say that in this territory that is amazing, as Alison mentioned, there's also grave problems as a result of historical processes of colonization, fairly recent colonization, uh, uh, and deforestation. So you can see in this picture a huge amount. So what you see there is basically a huge amount of small-scale family farms with some areas of forest, but most of them are actually exotic plantations because the original forest has been almost completely replaced by other land uses due to this encroachment of population that took refuge basically in this area. So that was once very rich in fisheries, and other resources for hunting and gathering and fishing, but that are today very much depleted as well. So it's quite a complicated situation, and in that context, families have for many years now in an intergenerational basis, basically, but in a way, in a process that has accelerated in the last 10 years due to families basically doing a collective dialogue about how to confront this situation, also in the face of climate change and droughts in Chile, how to reattain, reconfigure, recompose a good life. And here you can pass to the next slide just to finish, Alison. So this concept of buen vivir or kvmemongen as a Mapuche concept that refers to enacting situated forms of living well together, humans and other than humans, in this territory, no? So this is the context where we have engaged for more than a decade now in this process of that we like to term as indigenous codesign. And this is what we are going to present today, basically, based on our experience.
And before we get into it, I just wanted to say that so before we even arrived, I mean, before this collaborative co-design, began, communities had been maintaining their reciprocal relationship with their heritage, their biocultural heritage, and they were already building these practical steps to rebuilding reciprocal indigenous economies. So we became part of that process in time in 2013. And I also wanted to mention as well that, and this is probably something that is a feedback to the article that we wrote, is that we do need to define indigenous-led. So meaning that in our context, indigenous-led is not just referring to the person's body, like meaning their ethnicity or skin color, but also their indigenous ways of life, their knowledge systems, indigenous governance, incorporating traditional leaders, for example, that have been around, that system of governance since pre-colonial times. It also involves the Mapuche language as best as possible, because the language itself contains epistemology, thought processes, and perception. So it's not just a simple translation from Mapuche to Spanish or English. In fact, the Mapuche language does have its own way of thinking that sometimes cannot be translated to English or Spanish. And in our case, we were fortunate that the communities were still living in their ancestral lands, because in other cases, indigenous communities have been kind of removed from their lands. But in this case, they're still in touch and in contact, and therefore also in tune with their environmental surroundings, an environment in the Western concept, right? So it could also mean living and non-living species. So they're still in tune with that, as well as agroecological cycles. So that's the context of what we mean by indigenous-led. I just wanted to kind of provide that a little bit more insight. Oh, Nancy, you're muted.
So I guess this is my slide. Is this my slide, right? So, okay. So basically, I'm going to just read through. Can you hear me?
Sorry.
So, as early researchers, we focus, well, in this paper, in exploring this what we define as key moments of mutual learning within this longer than usual process in terms of the duration of normal quote research project, where each of these moments involved collective learning through feedback loops across diverse areas of expertise in these longer periods and rhythms, flexible rhythms, and through which tools, protocols, and methods gradually took shape through these successive learning opportunities, periods of immersion, accordance to community-led protocols, and decision-making and evaluation mechanisms. As we will see, the work suggests a new understanding, I'm not sure new, but maybe a broader understanding of the involvement of valid researchers in indigenous-led codesign processes, which we consider increasingly relevant before the climate crisis.
So I pulled this little framework that we tried doing a few years ago, basically trying to highlight how we as non-Mapuche researchers engaged in this Mapuche-led co-design. And I guess we tried to show that it wasn't linear. And despite of it not being linear, we were still generating new knowledge and aiming to restore biodiversity. So we examined this as a overlapping grass-led learning process led by the communities. And by that, I mean, again, the system, like Ignacio mentioned, the systems of protocol, decision-making, the language, the involvement of the traditional leaders. And so for this particular paper, I'm using paper because that's what we're presenting today, is the work that we were able to submit. We outlined 3 moments of mutual learning to illustrate how Mapuche-led co-design serves as an approach to decolonizing knowledge and research. So we attempted for it to not to be confined to any specific Western economic theories, but tried to ensure that it relied on land, on earth, in the Mapuche language it's called Mapu, or country, as with our colleagues mentioned, but also how country, the word country, is also an agent in building knowledge theoretical frameworks. The land, the earth.
So the first moment that we outline is a moment defined by a process of invitation. That was the initial first moment. But as I mentioned, these are not necessarily stages in a linear way, but in a way overlapping cycles. And this initial one, this had to do basically with learning from each other, we as allied researchers and them as ancestral Mapuche communities, to generate a framework of agreements that would be the fundament of all the processes that followed. We identified four sort of key learning points in this first moment that had to be with the need to respect the traditional processes and authorities as defined by the communities themselves, building wherever we were going to do upon the strengths, assets, and capacities of the Mapu and its people, facilitating, and this included basically also working with a local team and incorporating their capacities, a team of Mapuche women. Then facilitating mutual learning through cycles of investigation and feedback. So a protocol of these feedback loops were defined. So the authorities and community members would have the information they needed to guide the process and even eventually put a stop to it if they needed to do so. And finally, prioritizing inclusivity within the community, meaning that all the voices had to be accounted for, and the strengths of the community members incorporated into the process.
As you can see, this is probably why it took a few years, because community organizing is also a big part of working with communities. I mean, if it rains, the meeting is canceled, so you have to reschedule the meeting. Yeah, sorry, go for it.
Okay, sorry for these slides are very text heavy, but so as a product of this first stage, there was basically a version of this community economies tool, which is called the Apoyo Mutuo or Mutual Support group, that basically was co-designed to facilitate savings and family asset building, as well as to keep the cash in the community, so families could reinvest in their assets. Then it was meant to provide strategic opportunities to improve or to attain well-being while adhering to Mapuche values. That was a key goal of this, basically making those two compatible, which are not always are. Then there was a component of self-governance in the sense that the idea was that not only in the initial process, but along the development of the tool, the communities would have an enhanced self-determination in regards to development and economic decision making. So in that way, in a way, without knowing at the time, we were in a way starting this dialogue with the community economies network, where decision and ethical decisions around economy are so important, central to this approach. Then the idea of harnessing both monetary and non-monetary assets that we took from work done by the Native Development Institute in the US, and linking the economy to savings and the Mapuche way of life, that I think is a little bit of maybe a synthesis of all the previous.
So yeah, I think this is just to highlight that where where we where we began from a very you know, what is economy from the Mapuche perspective? It was through this process that in time, especially as we began with agroecological kind of approaches, that in time we realized that economy is linked to restoration and reforestation of wetlands and forests. So, so today, even though economy is kind of like a small motor for each of the communities we work with, because we now work with 3 where we began with 1. The main vision is restoration, and it's a long-term effort, and it probably multi-generational. So, but the idea is that the economy of each community coexists with the restoration efforts. And so that's why this association, Budi, is now in place and is our main kind of shell, I guess, of this work that brings together all these efforts of community economies. And it was founded in 2019. This is what they do, is they do regular restoration efforts together as in different parts of the territory.
Alison, so Steven also thinks you are fading in and out.
Oh,
It's like when you
maybe.
move, I'm not sure what is going on, but I'm going to keep going, but maybe you can
Stop moving.
stop moving or something. I don't know.
Okay, I'll try.
So, okay, so the restoration thing was sort of a leap forward. So I guess I'm going back to a few years ago when we were just starting to, or not we, but them, starting to develop this new focus, because the project started as an economic management project, right? And it was through the process of self-evaluation. Once this community mutual support group was already in place, people even committed their assets, their savings and everything, and it started moving forward. So we were now in charge of designing a self-evaluation method. So we could uh, uh, guide and track, not we, but themselves with our support, the activities and impacts of the group over time. So here in the picture, there is one of the tools that we use. It was this, we designed this kind of
Ignacio's
hmm?
illustration. I just want to say that was your illustration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did these tools that everyone said that it was not going to work with illiterate people, and it worked perfectly. And people could evaluate to what extent were they satisfied with their uh, goals. Well, first, actually, there was a qualitative process where they defined their priorities. We then ranked the priorities, and then we figured this tool that was to see how satisfied they felt with the contribution of the apoyo mutuo to these different community goals, which has to do with self-determination, good coexistence, culture, environment, community organizations, agriculture. I'm doing this out of memory, it's 10 years ago. Education and agriculture, or
Land, I think it was.
So basically, through these processes, the most interesting thing is that community dialogue was triggered, and through this dialogue, these environmental, so-called environmental priorities emerged. So the third moment has to do with these emerging priorities for restoration, where basically, and I think this is one of the main points of this paper, is that it was only in a later stage, after the community made this link between self-governance, the economy, or their ability to strengthen their community economy, that the idea of environmental and biocultural restoration took a central stage. And so now the task was to design biocultural indicators or criteria. So to say, biocultural really is a translation of the Mapuche concept of kvmemongen, which is literally means all life forms, but in the conceptual and philosophical and historic context of the Mapuche people, basically means the consideration of humans and other than humans as part of a web of life uh, that was threatened by colonialism, and that is now in a process of recomposing. So this is what they call the migratory thungu. Is a sort of a navigation chart, is a planning basically tool uh, consisting in this is more current. This is not even in the paper, I think, because this is what we're doing now. Um, consists of four areas, or troi. It's not areas really. Mapuche troi is articulation, meaning that these are integral parts of a whole. Without one of them, the other fall a piece. Yeah, that's the real. The, so each troi so has a Mapuche denomination that is this sort of phrases, but are really very complex concepts. That so the first one, or I'm going to start here in the you cannot say my cursor, but in the bottom, but because you all also in Mapuche go always to the right in the counterclock. So in the bottom you see Kmefeleam ka Yafulu Kletual Pulov, meaning an approximate translation. It has to do with recovering well-being and strength of each community. And each one has sort of sub criteria or indicators. We are not going to present it now because we'll save it for when it's actually ready. Then Rekulwain in Kapeyaltain Lasken Mapu means basically coming together to defend our country or coastal country. Uño Inatuain Tain Kymemongen means resuming or a good life. That is sort of the more economically oriented component. And Inarume Wain Yempuruma Alta Inkimun, it has to do with supporting or fundamenting an educational process towards the communities, towards the families, based on their own knowledge. So that's is a component that has to do with the collaborative work that is being done with community radios and schools. So we might want to maybe talk later about any of these areas that you may have questions. But basically, the interesting thing is not that this is not just sort of the typical sort of visioning exercise, but it's actually based on stuff that the community is already doing, or that through Budianumk. So the 16 basically points are points of action that are already being advanced. And the idea is that, or this monitoring tool is going to work on the basis of practice. It's going to monitor practice as a way to approach this biocultural restoration challenge of considering humans and other than humans as part of a same web that has to be restored.
And again, this was done through meetings where there was efforts to ensure that traditional authorities were invited, and these meetings would take, would be hours, because sometimes one person talks like for 30 minutes. I mean, the Mapuche culture, there is a big pride in oral expression. But I did want, the reason why I mentioned this is because, oh, am I cutting out again? Okay. The
You
reason why
are,
I mentioned,
Alison.
oh, that's so strange.
Not cutting, but fading in and out.
Okay,
Every
I'm
time
gonna
you move,
I'm gonna try not to move. Okay.
maybe you take out the phone, the ear
The
plugs.
headphones? Okay.
Try that.
Can you hear me? I think
Yeah,
maybe
much
the,
better.
the internet might be too. Oh, is it the head? Oh, it's probably the headphones. Okay.
Yeah, much better.
Trial and error. Um, so yeah, so the thing is that the reason why I mentioned this is because in each of these sessions, we counted on the Mapuche team that is working closely and that work in communications actually. And so they use tools such as video to record these sessions. And the research team of Budianumka, we would listen to the recordings afterwards and start to prioritize elements of I don't want to say indicators because that's a very Western concept, but basically trying to understand the points of tension, creative tension, as we were saying in another part, as ways to explore how to further create this framework for restoration. And the reason why this is relevant is because of the dialogue between Mapuche ways of knowing and being in restoration and scientific ways of knowing and being in restoration, meaning Western science. Because at some point, the Budianumka also began to explore collaboration with universities that focus on, for example, lab results from the lake, in terms of how the sedimentation and how polluted it is. And indeed, we found out, it was confirmed that the lake is basically dying. So there is an urgent need to halt some of these processes of contamination, but also restoration of new economies, which doesn't involve, for example, agrochemicals. So anyway, so these kind of things emerged in the need to build bridges between within the Mapuche ways of being, how that can guide scientific methods. And so these collaborative efforts also in itself was its own protocol process, meaning that There was an invitation by the university to support. There was a need for them to talk in person. I mean, so this was a whole process also. So I just wanted to mention that this at this stage where we're at is trying to understand the dialogue between science or Western science and under the guidance of the Mapuche way of being. So in conclusions, and then what we can get to back to this, to the where we're at now, if we want to open up to discussion. But yeah, that's kind of what it leads to. What I'm trying to say is the role of external allies and researchers is crucial, especially when it comes to restoration. And we often so we talk about how the role of the researcher from the very beginning is in an unequal footing, and that includes Ignacio and myself too also, because of the recognition that we come from a world that has been colonized, where we speak dominant languages, in this case Spanish. And there is already from the beginning an imbalance of knowledge recognition, I guess. So in order to decolonize this decision making in research, we feel that, or we learned, I should say, in the process, but it was also because we were independent from certain criteria imposed by external institutions. So we were kind of autonomous to begin with. So that gave us the ability to be responsible to address these imbalances and to ensure that the communities had the final say, even though that placed us in very vulnerable positions at times. And therefore taking risks on budgets, for example, or timelines. But it is through this creation of these safe spaces where our vulnerabilities are acknowledged, is an opportunity to create, to establish fair and equal conditions for the whole research group, both non-Mapuche and Mapuche. So this collective journey towards enhanced indigenous or Mapuche self-determination decision-making process throughout this research is what we feel needs to happen more, or I should say needs to be highlighted, because I think it's already happening in many places already, but how can we highlight that even more to connect the new ways of knowledge that are being emerging. So
Alison,
yeah.
I think that that was a good closing. This is already it's a sort of a synthesis, and yes, I mean,
Okay.
because it was planned for an hour, so we would, or maybe just do
Okay.
it quickly, so we have 10 minutes to talk.
This is the
Just
last slide,
yeah.
actually.
Okay. Okay.
But and some pictures. But yeah, let's do that then. I didn't know it was just for an hour. I thought it was an hour and a half. Sorry. So yeah, let me go back then to where we're at now. This is, maybe we can ask from our colleagues reflections and observations or reactions, because this is where Ignacio and I are right now with the research collective with Budi and Nunca. What exactly are we trying to do here? Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
So, is there any question or comments, or maybe something that you would like us to expand on? Maybe.
So I've got, I don't have a question yet in my mind, but I've sort of got a comment, because as I was listening to you, I was actually thinking about the links to the session we had yesterday on diverse democracies. And I think Ruby was at that session too, so Ruby might have some observations too. But one of the things that came out, I mean, like because the
Yeah,
emphasis that you put on self-governance is very much about a form of participatory democracy. And one of the things we talked about yesterday a little bit was the sort of training that's needed for people to be able to participate, to know how to participate in participatory democracy activities. And Josh presented that it's not just elections, it's a whole range of ways in which people can participate in participatory democracies. And in a way, the workplace is one of them. But I suppose what I'm just thinking of is here, what's so interesting is how the environment comes in as being so incredibly important, which we didn't sort of get to yesterday in the discussion. But also, building on this incredibly rich tradition of ways of working together, and the oral tradition. And if somebody's going to talk for 30 minutes, you sit there and respectfully listen to them talking for 30 minutes or whatever. So I just was thinking about the connection with yesterday more than anything in my mind.
Yeah, the Mapuche have this tradition of I would say direct democracy. I wouldn't shy away. It's a system of nested governance because they have like this autonomous nuclei, which are what they call LOF, which is translated sometimes as community, but really LOF involves also the other than humans. That's also very particular because you have LOF Che, which is the human group, and LOF Mapu, which is the space of coexistence. So these LOF are sort of the basic units, and they are autonomous. They can deliver and make their decisions on how they want to relate to the rest. And then you have broader sort of nested or broader layers of governance, which coordinate, are sort of forms of coordinating these little units into broader units. And today this is still practiced mostly through ceremony, through the ceremonial grounds where people gather once a year and so on. But the idea of the leaders, the community leaders, is that they can reactivate these structures as a way of governance, of nested governance in the current times. And I think they are doing it quite successfully. They are building on this ancient tradition and sort of updating it through these kind of tools that we have described.
And actually, listening to you speaking, Natia, it makes me think about, I don't know if this is common knowledge or anything, but from what I understand, sustainability of cultures become sustainable when they adjust to modern times. And it's not just cultures, it's also like phenomena of power structures. I think, and I'm not trying to compare this with with the context that we're in, but the reason why I say that is because for example, the communities that we work with happen to have leaders who manage both worlds. So they're excellent speakers in Spanish, but also excellent speakers in Mapudungun. And the same with the youth. They're faced with twofold responsibility to be excellent youth, young people in Western ways in the Chilean context, but also excellent participants in their own communities. And so handling technology has become a tool as well. So I feel like this adjustment is also just as needed to have a strong democratic or a strong system of governance, these adjustments.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the way that it's now become really oriented around thinking about ecosystems in the context of climate change and so on, and living with drought, for example.
So in a way, the culture is still dynamic. It's still living. Yeah.
I'm reminded there, Allison, of the first time I heard you and Ignacio speak in Oliviana, where you were referencing Gerald Visner's work, the Native American writer who talks about sort of the trickster element of culture being part of what makes it lively, and the refusal to be sort of become a museum piece. Thanks for your presentation. And I guess I don't want to give away the store, but I feel like it resonates with Bavia's upcoming keynote, where she's talking about this concept of kvmemongen, which is a sort of local approach to self-governance in the Indian context where she's been working, that's deeply embedded in patriarchy, but is open to kind of living reinterpretation, and in her case by this radical feminist collective that she's helped foment over the last decade or so. I guess the other thing that was really coming through was the long durée of your work. At one point, Ignacio, you said this is stuff from 10 years ago. So kind of wondering like what role does academic knowledge and in particular evaluation play in kind of keeping the conversation going? Does it help or does it work against it? Because it like there were a few points where you talked about tools being important. So just curious to hear how that interacts with the system of nested governance that is from antiquity.
Yeah. Maybe, for instance, I think that this concept of indicators, for instance, sort of resume or is at the center of that discussion, because we are sort of required to quantify or to, produce evidence, even if qualitative, wherever, but evidence of, positive change, this and that, so we get funded, right? So that's where we need to use all of our Western, basically, toolkit.
But it
And
was also an
indeed,
internal process, I think, too. Sorry, Ignacio, can I? Or...
yeah, please.
Well, because evaluation was also a principle that we use to document in time. So in a way, for example, these levels of the little cups, that was actually used in the team with the team management after every meeting of members for them to evaluate themselves. Like, for
Right.
example, are they satisfied with the level of Mapudungun that was spoken, or where there was the percentage of women that participated in these meetings. So I think that this was something that, as Ignacio mentioned, I think we brought that in also to strengthen the kind of like the documentation process towards where we're at now. Yeah.
And it was and these tools were began to be appropriated. That's where also where began to be appropriated for internal processes. So, as I think I mentioned too, and the paper I think is also mentioned, there was this quantitative exercise of semi-quantitative, but possibly the most interesting thing was not that the agriculture got a 7 as opposed to an 8, but it was the conversation that was triggered by this. And those conversations were the ones that led to this agroecology focus and the biocultural focus and a focus on women, a focus on women-led livelihoods, and so on.
You was a good.
So it's so finally there is, and it's not always. I mean, sometimes it feels like a puzzle. I mean, it's not always easy. For instance, now we are, and I wanted to also get there, this whole concept of biocultural indicators. I think we are still struggling. We have the system now, which is a system of criteria, I would say. It's like dimensions of these 4 bigger dimensions and the sub-dimensions that they all refer to practice, which I think is very interesting. And now the challenge is how to make this quantifiable. And easily comunicable, ¿cómo se dice? ¿Se puede decir?
Communicate.
Communicable
Shared.
through numbers or other forms of, evidencing, change. But it's all a very interesting process where the community is also sort of taking what they or selecting the tools that seem more fit to their oral processes, their this deliberative process that I think are still the central ones, the articulating ones. I don't know,
That's a good
Steven, if that
question.
was somewhat close to what you
Nobody
were
has ever
thinking.
asked us that question, so thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I think it does. I mean, I guess one thing that came through to me was the way in which like indicators that satisfy funders kind of get caught up in that logic that Visner describes of kind of turning yourself into a bit of a museum piece. Whereas when using the cups to take a measure of how we're feeling is more that part of an ongoing process. But of course, we can't really fully account for it,
Yeah.
since it would take too many words.
I think it's a permanent
Feel
tension,
very
to be very
familiar.
honest. I don't think we have figured it out. I think it's a permanent creative tension on to what extent they appropriate this under cultural control, not just start using it with critically, you see, because to get funds, but actually appropriating these tools for self-governance in their own terms. I think there is a constant tension, but it's a good one. It doesn't mean, I mean, it's a in that sense, it's a learning process. Sometimes these tools are just used for external purposes and not internally, and eventually dropped out. And sometimes they start becoming central to certain internal processes. But yeah, Alison.
Yeah, and then the concept of the biodiversity, I know we're running out of time, but very often, so Ignacio and I, with our Mapuche colleagues, have had the opportunity to present some of this work in the Chilean context, within a scientific setting, within an academic setting. And a couple of times, we keep getting the question like, so what are the indicators for restoration? Like, where are they? And I think that there's this expectation like of a menu of textual. That's why we're challenging it through a visual concept first, because it's the feeling of success more than the amount of ticks you can put next to the word wetland. It's like, how do we transfer that knowledge and that recognition of movement in time, the theory of change, right? Within a non-textual way. So I think that's part of the reason why we're exploring illustration from that perspective. But also, it's the agent of the body, because I think that, the Western scientific, especially conservationist approach, they count and the person is invisible in the entorno, in the lands. We're just the observer, the agents that's observing. Where like that movie. What was that movie with Jim Carrey? Anyways, but in reality, we are part of the environment. So how is the Mapuche body, the Che, because they have different kinds of elements of knowledge. So it's the mind, the soul, the spirit. How is the body involved with restoration? And so there is a increasing awareness that the earth, the agent, the Mapu needs our help to restore. And it's very clearly the case. Like it's almost so obvious that it's like it's not really, it hasn't yet been recognized as an indicator, I guess, in science. I don't know. But yeah, so that's
But
kind of where we're at
this
right
emphasis
now. Yeah.
on practice is very interesting. For instance, there's
practice,
some of
yeah.
these indicators that are still emerging. That is, for instance, talking in the radio about environmental issues as an indicator of restoration, because it's about restoring knowledge, it's about restoring a sense of place. So, another one is establishing you know, livelihoods that are respectful of the natural spaces. Just as simple as that. But they are all referred to practice, to the che, as Alison says, interacting
Mhm.
with the land. And some of them are all of them are actually, I think we are going to be ready soon this is actually it's going to be, I will upload into the website. So when we have it uploaded, we will let you know for sure.
Good. I've got to jump onto a call with a student. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's
No,
Thank
no,
you
to
so
see you
much
both.
for being with us.
yeah.
Bye, everyone.
See you soon.
I just
See
I
you.
wondered if Ruby wanted to say something. She's got to
Yeah.
have to head off too. Yeah. But
Yeah,
there's some
sorry.
resonances.
But thanks so much. It was so interesting. I do have to head off, but maybe I'll reach out and discuss further over email. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Rui.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ruby.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alison and Ignacio.
Thank you,
Thank
Jenny,
you,
so
Jenny.
much for
Fantastic. No,
everything.
No, the
Hugs.
work's fantastic. Yeah, you too. Yeah,
Thank you. Take care.
lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah, you too.
Bye, Jenny.
Bye.